And we are live, Dr. Fuller. How are you this morning, sir?
I'm well, sir. How are you?
Good, good. We're missing our brother Rich Brown, of course, but we will do our best to stand in for his expertise in doing all this.
We're going to have to make some policy changes and change the parking spaces right off the bat.
Exactly. Change the locks too.
There's a thought.
Yeah,
There's going to be some changes around this joint.
that's right, and they benefit us.
Certainly, we double the salaries across the board.
That's right. That's right. What's 0 times 2?
Oh
yeah,
I'm not a math guy, but
Yeah, sorry. Illinois public school education. I'll have to get a calculator out here pretty soon. So, and I'll start off by apologizing. When I set the stream up this morning, it wouldn't let me into the coin members area on Facebook. I don't know why. I don't know how I angered it, but I put a post up on the coin members area saying it was on the YouTube channel and in the regular area. So
yeah, I saw that.
I see Will Rhodes made it over. Thanks, brother. Coin number 2269. What's that coin thing there, Dr. Fuller?
Well, that is the symbol of all that is right and good in the world. It is a coin that you receive with membership in the American Warrior Society. And indicates your access to the vault, and you can eat at the cool kids table at lunch. So that's good.
Yes, absolutely. So those are the numbers you see splashing up here in the comments. Thank you, Will Rhodes. He said he shared it to the coin member area.
Nice.
And so that's good. So now it's up on there as well. Excellent. So, and I will throw in a plug for Dr. Fuller's book, Painting Over Rust, one of his 2 books, critically acclaimed.
That's right. The lauds and the laurels are pouring in.
Yes,
around the globe.
I'm sure the phone is ringing nonstop.
It's we all have our cross to bear, Will.
Yes, it is. Mine is good looks. Yours is talent and ability.
I think you won on that one.
No, I'm pretty sure you won on that one because it's all relative and I'm getting old. So, all right. So we're going to do the regular news and economics thing. So like we were talking about offline there, TC, I want you to hold me to account because I know sometimes I have a tendency to rip through this stuff. So if I run through something and it's not clear, call me out on it. Okay.
I will absolutely be the intellectual canary in the coal mine today.
Look at you go. All right. So let me see if I can manage to bring this in here.
Yeah, I don't understand what you just put up on the screen.
Okay. All right. Well, we've set the baseline. Okay. This is your pay scale here at American Warrior Society. You'll notice it's going down now. So
notice a trend.
Yes. There's a pattern here if you're paying attention. This is CNN's Fear Greed Index. Well, I'm not a big fan of CNN on many levels. What I have found, however, is whether it's CNN Business, Fox Business, the business side of these propaganda machines tend to be pretty good because people make and lose money off those channels. So they have to toe the line a little more, if you will.
Okay.
So the Fear Greed Index looks at 6 different factors. There's put call ratios and a bunch of stuff we don't need to really dive into. So then they put this into a numerical fashion here. We see it currently is at 71, which is greed. A week, maybe 10 days ago, it was up at like 76, 77, which is extreme greed. And the market runs on emotion. Go ahead.
In order to clarify, the horizontal line is time, right? Months, dates, years. And the vertical line is representative of the markets and the people in the markets, trading the markets, whether they're being greedy or they're being fearful, which means they're selling or they're buying. Am I
correct? If they're greedy, they're buying exorbitantly. Let's say an extreme greed. An extreme fear would be like the bottom of the GFC when, oh my gosh, it's never going to come back. That sort of feeling.
Okay. So low points in the line indicate people are selling like the house is burning down.
Exactly.
And high points in the line indicate that people are buying and therefore indicate some additional levels of confidence in the markets and life in general.
To the extreme, however.
Okay.
Remember prior to the GFC, this time's different. The housing market will never go down. Just buy.
Okay. GFC stands for, I'm sorry. GFC stands for
the Great Financial Crisis, the housing crisis.
Got it.
Okay. So where we're at right now is we're at 71, which is I'll say high greed. Okay. So if we look around the last 2 years, 2022 market was down 30% ish. 2023, it snapped back up to basically break even from there. Even though, as we have talked about on the show many times, the underlying economic conditions aren't good, but there's just been enough money printed and slammed into the system. It has to go somewhere. And so, and this is just a sad reality of our world. They gave a lot of money to, frankly, people who don't understand money. So they went out and spent it instead of investing it. Okay. Well, then that filters through to banks, more wealthy individuals. Well, then they want to go get a return on that money. So what do they do with it? Bonds, stocks, CDs, all those sorts of things drives the market up. And then regular folks like us who have 401ks and IRAs, we go, hey, market's going up. Let's buy into that. And it becomes, for a while, it becomes this self-licking ice cream cone. And that's when we get into these periods of greed and extreme greed, because every time the market takes a dip, people go, oh, it's a buying opportunity. They pour more money in, and that drives it even higher. So there's one of the things I'm really wrapping my head around now is the level of disconnect between the stock market and the economy right now. Because if you go out and talk to people in the economy, they're hurting. Prices are up, wages are up, but not enough to cover all those price increases. But the stock market just keeps chugging along, because as long as money keeps coming in, supply and demand, those prices are going to keep going up.
So, in essence, if I'm hearing you correctly, our economic reality is sort of divorced from the stock market, which is uncommon, right? Not something that happens a lot. And the stock market can largely be, maybe manipulated is too strong a word, maybe it's not, but it can be artificially inflated and artificially propped up in ways that the economy can't necessarily sustain.
So let's break that down a little bit. So can the stock market be manipulated? Yes, and it is every day. There are, if you want to dig into this for a moment, there's a volatility controlled trading out there. So the volatility of the market is how fast it's going up and down. Not whether it's going up and down, but it's how fast it's going up and down. Okay. And these funds, if volatility is going down, typically when volatility goes down, the market's going up. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So what they will do is these fund managers will literally go buy options on the market to drive the volatility down so they make more money. And this is happening behind the scenes every day. It is completely out of control. Your big boys, your Blackstones, Black Rocks, all those big boys, they're out there doing this every single day with options on stocks.
When they buy an option, it locks them in at that moment's price, correct?
So an option,
whether or not they actually buy the stock later.
Right. I play around with options on stocks, and so far what I've discovered is I'm not very good at it. I've successfully lost money almost every time.
Well played.
Yeah. Well, I know my strengths, but I still enjoy playing around with it because a 400% return in 20 minutes is not uncommon. So I use very, very small dollar amounts on that. But so the way an option works, we'll say it's a call option, which means I'm betting that the stock price is going to go up. And let's just say it's Apple, which I think right now is about $175 a share. I will go into the market and say, I think in 30 days, the price of Apple is going to go to 200. I want to buy an option to buy Apple on a given date, say March 31st, to make life easy here, at $200 a share. And TC says, I've got some Apple shares, and I don't think that's going to happen. So you agree to sell me your Apple shares at $200 a share on March 31st for a certain price. And it might be, depending on how likely we both think this is to happen, it might be 20 cents a share. It might be $1 a share. It might be $4 a share. Depends on how far out it is, both in time and in price. So let's say March 31st rolls around and Apple is under 200. Then that premium that I gave you to have that option you get to keep that. And you still have your Apple shares.
But you're going to opt out of actually buying the Apple shares because they're not worth $200 a share.
Correct. That option will not exercise because it never reached the criteria of $200 a share.
So it's sort of an automated system.
It is, yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Now let's say it goes to 225. Okay. Well, on March 31st, I'll say, I'll take that option. Thank you very much. And even though Apple is at 225 a share, you have to sell it to me for 200 a share.
Okay.
So then let's just say I paid you $1 a share for that option.
Mm-hmm.
I pay you 200. I pay you 200 for the stock, like we agreed on, and I paid you the $1 before. So I got 201 in it, but now I can immediately go sell that on the market for 225.
So when you buy the option, that transaction's over with. I now get to keep that money.
Correct.
Regardless of what happens later, that's my money.
Correct.
Okay. So there's a gamble involved for you.
Absolutely.
And there's a potential loss of unrealized monies for me.
Correct. So the way it's played is on my end of that example, I'm gambling, in my opinion, that Apple will go above 200. You're locking in $1 a share on the bet that it won't go that high. So let's say you had bought 1,000 shares of Apple at $100 a share, and you only put 100 up for this. Well, you got your money and you played the game. You lost a little bit of upside, but you got your $1 a share too.
Okay.
So markets can be manipulated through this because let's say a big player comes in and buys, and this is not a made up number, buys a couple $100 million worth of XYZ stock options at a higher price in a relatively short date, say a week. Well, the market's going to see that and react to that.
And think, well, that big guy knows something that's going on. He's got some kind of inside information. Let's jump on this gravy train.
Exactly. So the markets can absolutely be manipulated through the options market.
And because these big guys have more money to throw around. I mean, you and I may have $10,000 to throw around, $5,000 to throw around. They've got $5 billion to manipulate the market with. They're more risk averse because they can absorb a big loss that would put you and I in debtor's prison.
Yes.
More easily. So that makes sense. And
options can also be used conversely on the way down. So I can say, I think Apple's going to go from the current 175. I think it's going to go to 150. So now I would say on such and such date, I want the option to buy your Apple shares for 150 a share, assuming they go below that. That's a put option. So now this is for you, you're selling insurance because let's say it goes down to 140. Well, now you just sold it at 150.
So that seems like very short-term thinking. I mean, nobody's thinking, I'm going to buy this Apple and I'm going to sell an option a year out.
You can.
You can do that. But
yes,
most people, if I'm like, what little stock market stuff I do, I buy and then I sit on it for decades.
Okay.
But it sounds like, day traders would be interested in a lot of what this option stuff, people that are looking, like you said, make 400% in 20 minutes kind of thing.
Yep. So there's that side of it. There's also hedging with options. And this is something I've been playing with. So for instance, I bought some options on an ETF named USO is the ticker. It's US oil. And so with all the happiness going on in the Middle East, which you may have heard about.
I read something somewhere.
Yeah. There's a little blurb in the paper. So what I did was USO, I think is currently at like 70 something a share, somewhere in there. So I bought options on that for, I think it was July, for 90 a share. So in other words, oil would have to go up quite dramatically for this to make money. But I put a small dollar amount in it, but if it goes up, I could be looking at a 12,000% return.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this is also you hear about airlines doing this with fuel prices. What they're actually doing is buying options in the future on jet fuel prices, and that way, if the prices shoot up, they still pay for their jet fuel at that given price of the market at the time. but their hedges, the options they bought, are paying off big time, offsetting that increase. So it allows them to forecast their future
I was
expenses.
gonna say, yeah, it also allows them to budget, right? Because no matter what the market does, they know that on this date, this is what we're going to pay for fuel.
Exactly right. Farmers do this a lot too.
Yeah.
Farmers have started doing this with, say, corn farmers. Will do this with corn futures, and they do it through cooperatives. And individual farmers, I don't think, do it very often, but they'll do it through their associations, and it's a way to hedge risk.
Yeah, it also it amortizes the risk out over a bunch of people instead of just you taking all that risk.
Right.
Okay,
So,
I get that.
Hey, let me see if I can figure out how to put comments on here. Let me see here. So let me see here. Yeah, I think I got to figure it out. Look at this.
There it is.
Kyle, our buddy from the Philippines. Coffee with Will? No, sir. It is bang. I don't do coffee. I'm a bad person. And Dirk Diggler's in the house, of course. You have to read the book. Know that one, guys. You have to read the book. So our good friend John Schreiber from Yukon, Oklahoma is in the house. And
chilly out there.
John from Glasgow, good to see you. I'm not even going to try to do the accent. I would just anger you if I did that.
Now, as I understand it, he's traveling with our Lord and Savior here, Rich Brown, the founder and normal host. All hail, Rich.
Yes, all hail. What was it from Spaceballs? How did they do that in Spaceballs? All hail Scrooge. What was the motion though? I can't remember.
Oh,
I'm ashamed of myself.
Yeah, you and me both. Now I got to watch it this afternoon. Thanks.
Yeah.
I haven't watched that movie in 30 years.
Yeah, but you can still tell lines out of it, I'm sure.
One or two. Yeah, we're combing the desert.
We ain't found. I'll let that one go for now. Yeah. So Ted brings up a good point that we have touched on in the past. Imagine a job where you and 535 others have access to information for options. Mitch, meaning Mitch McConnell, I assume, is a great investor.
Yeah, if I may interject a quick war story. When I was working in the Office of Congressional Affairs at the Bureau, I spent a lot of time on the Hill. A lot of time. Now, I didn't talk to anybody in terms of, chit-chatting very much in sessions, but I got to sit in the room a lot and just watch these people.
Okay.
And there was one member of Congress that was on a committee that allowed him to bring in telecom CEOs and CFOs. And he was forever doing that. And I'm like, he's just listening to what their latest idea is for the next 6 months, the next year, the next 2 years, what their long-term plans are. And he's basing his investments on it.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's making a ton of money.
Yep.
And it was just rampant up there on that hill, that kind of stuff. And it's perfectly legal because they've written the laws in such a way that they can still invest and not get banged for insider trading that would put you and I in a prison.
Yep.
And that's how you walk into Congress broke, making $150,000 a year. And 20 years later, you walk out with 160, 180, $200 million in your bank account.
Yep. And I think eventually that rooster's going to come home to roost. Those chickens are going to come home to roost because people are going to have enough. I mean, I'm not a great investor or a great trader, but I'm decent. And I worked my butt off last year and I got nowhere close to Nancy Pelosi 65%.
Yeah. What investment does anybody either on this show or watching the show currently have that pays 65%?
I mean,
do you have one that pays 15%? I mean, I'd be on board with that.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Heck, I'm pretty happy sitting in my tax-free munis right now, making 4.8.
Oh, see, now you're just flexing on us.
Yeah. But I'll tell you what, man. If you don't want to put money, if you got money sitting around right now, not financial advice, but if you got money sitting around in savings, and you don't want to put in an IRA for whatever reason, tax-free munis aren't too shabby right now. Talk to a broker. I tried to understand them, and I think I'm decent at this stuff. I finally I ran them through a JP Morgan account and just had those guys set it up. But 4.8% tax free, both federal and state income tax free. Pretty easy to do.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I figured out a long time ago. I was I was an infantry officer basic course in Fort Benning, Georgia. and which is still in my head Fort Benning. And we're doing some freaking 20-mile road march or whatever we were doing, and the captain in charge of all these lieutenants, he sits us down on a break, and he's like, "All right, you knuckleheads, listen up." He says, "You're all making more money than most of you have ever made in your life. Stop blowing it on cars and women and beer.
Mm-hmm.
Find a financial advisor you trust and do what they say."
Yep.
And he says, "This is the one I happen to use, but you find one that you like, you trust, and give them some of your money. Otherwise, you idiots will be freaking broke when you're retired." And I took that to heart, and I went and I found somebody I trusted, and here we are 30 years later. I'm still with them, and it's worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of me throwing money at them every month. Not a lot, just enough, but dollar cost averaging, it worked out really well for me because they're the experts, right? I'm not an expert in this stuff.
Yep. I will push back a little bit on that, saying that worked great then, and I'm really glad you made that choice. Okay. Here's the difference though. Since 1982, we'll say 40 years, money's just gotten cheaper and cheaper throughout that entire period of time. There literally wasn't anything you could put money in back when we were those young bucks and not be up substantially now.
Yeah.
What I say that not to put down any financial advisors working during that time, but now we're in a more expensive money phase. And I don't think it's going to go back to cheap money anytime soon unless something breaks in the economy. Because everybody's begging for a Federal Reserve, to lower the rates, but they don't lower rates when things are going well. They lower rates when things are going badly. So, we may get back to 0% interest rates at some point, but it'll be because we go through a pretty bad recession.
Okay.
That's the recession is what gets rid of the inflation, right?
Right.
So everybody's begging, when I say everybody, I mean Wall Street. They're begging for lower rates because lower rates means more money flows and more money flows to them. But to get there, some bad things are going to have to happen.
Back to the 18% home loans that we saw when you and I were kids.
Yeah. And I don't know if we'll get back to that. My gut tells me we won't, but what do I know? I've got in Illinois public school education. So.
Well, it's funny because we've talked about this a little bit here before. I'm kind of locked into this house that I'm in now because we refied it when rates were just, bargain basement. So I think I'm sitting on a home loan somewhere in the 2.5% right now.
Yep.
And everybody I know that's buying homes right now, and there's not a lot of them, but they're paying between 6 and 7.
Right.
And when you start doing the math on a $300,000 to $500,000 house, that's a significant monthly difference of your post-tax income going out the door.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what's happening to the existing home market. It's why the existing home market is just froze up right now. And it's why, it's been counterintuitive, but existing home market is pretty much locked up, but the home builders are doing awesome because they're willing to take a hit on some of their profit to buy down the interest rate on that loan. So as a first-time home buyer, you can do better going and buying a new home where the builder buys down the interest rate for, the first 5 years than buying an existing home that's actually cheaper. Wow. Yeah, it's a bass-backwards thing right now.
Yeah. But I can see how,
yeah.
when you explain it that way, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, this is how the numbers work out. So it's gonna be a real weird unwinding of all this.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
So which way do you see the greed and fear index going over the next month or two?
I see it coming down. Our economic numbers that'll be coming in, I think, are going to be worsening here. So as that happens, I think the market's going to come down here in the next few months. How much? Hard to say. And there's a lot of variables in that. The Middle East stuff, Ukraine, election year. There's just so many variables there, but the market is definitely overbought now. And the run in the last 6 weeks of 2023, we got a year's worth of returns in the stock market in like 6 weeks. It was up like 11% in 6 weeks. That's not based on
why that might have happened in an earlier show, correct? People were sort of insuring themselves against future hits. You want to kind of review that?
So a few things happened. First, they got oversold prior to that, and this kind of volatility within a year like this, where it went from oversold, meaning low, to overbought high. That kind of volatility you tend to see at market tops and bottoms. Well, we're certainly not at a market bottom, so that would tell you we're moving towards a market topping type environment here. And it just I think there some good economic numbers came in. Oil prices came down, which helped a lot because that freed up money for folks coming into the fourth quarter. And of course, there's the holiday spending through there as well. So, and it's funny how things morph over time. Have you ever heard of the Santa Claus rally in the stock market? So the Santa Claus rally is the rally in the stock market after businesses report their great Christmas season. Well, it used to be the Santa Claus rally happened in January because that's when they reported what happened in, right? Well, then everybody tried to front run this, of course, because we're all a bunch of humans and greedy, right? So next thing you knew, it was the Santa Claus rally instead of starting the second week of January. Next thing you knew, it was the last week of December.
Sure, well, but they're also starting all those Christmas sales pushes while the Halloween decorations are still
exactly.
Up, right?
Yep. So it just keeps edging forward and forward. So that played into it as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on out there right now, a lot of moving parts, and frankly, there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know what's going to happen with oil prices. Oil prices affect our economy in so many ways. That it boils down through CPI, what people can spend, therefore retail spending. There's a lot of big unknowns coming right now.
Historically speaking, what happens when the U.S. enters into a shooting war? To the stock market.
Yeah. Historically, it goes down because there's the money is withdrawn from the economy into the war effort. However, the GWAT changed all that because they just printed the money for the GWAT, right? So I'll never forget there was I think it was some Marines, I don't know where in Iraq. Somebody had scribbled on a wall, "America is not at war. America is at the mall. We are at war," right?
Right.
And I'm sure you saw that with your experience going over there and coming back. It was not a wartime footing here in the U.S., within months after 9/11?
Yeah.
You know, it was there for a little while. But life just plugged on because they just printed the money for it. Nobody outside of you guys that went over there really endured any hardship. But obviously the families did too, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, and it was kind of jarring too. I mean, you left the combat zone, and next thing you know, you're in the mall. You're having Taco Bell and drinking a Slurpee. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So let's see here. Alan Kelly, you want to read off what Alan has there?
Our illustrious POTUS is touting his dumbonomics, if I pronounce that right, based on the stock market, but ignoring all of the suffocating canaries that indicate an unstable economy.
Yes.
That's a good point. I mean, it's funny to watch television these days, and we've talked about it quite a bit here, where the media is just clearly a mouthpiece for whoever they happen to support politically. And then you go across the street, like I live across the street from my grocery store. I can walk there, and I see that, beef is 75% more expensive than when our current POTUS took over, or gas is $1 a gallon more expensive, and this, I think, is what the average person looks at, right? I mean, the stock market is a great indicator, but most of us, I think, are similar to me in that it's somewhere in between magic and sorcery and, some sort of, smart guy manipulation.
Yeah.
But what we do understand is, hey, my gas budget has gone up, 60%.
Yeah.
What I have to pay for gas, what I have to pay for food has gone up, X%. Shrinkonomics, that's become a big thing, right? How many times you go down, you buy a package that used to be X number of ounces, and hey, for the same price, you get a package of the same stuff, but now it's 60% of what you used to get for that much.
Yes. Yep. For sure. And this, let's dig into that because we're going to dig into some CPI numbers today. And do me a favor, I forgot to bring a notebook down here with me. Make a note about exactly that point about regular people versus academics, because I think that's where we're seeing a major disconnect with the analysis on inflation right now. And it will lead to, I think it'll lead. not lead to, what's the word, contribute to more social strife. So your Don, is not only that money is now more expensive, it's also that money is no longer honest. And I couldn't agree with you more there. We see that happen a lot.
And not just in the political realm. Right? I mean,
Right.
whoever heard the term influencers 5 years ago, right? And
Yeah.
yet now, my kid's watching, my 5-year-old watches this little Russian girl on YouTube. Never heard of her, and she dances around, does goofy stuff with her dad, and it's entertaining for a 5-year-old. It's so saccharine, it gives me type 2 diabetic attacks when I walk through the room. But you said it on a lark. I looked the girl up. She's worth $100 million. She's probably 12 years old.
Yeah.
Never heard of her.
Yep.
Never heard of her. But she's an influencer. There's all
Right.
that money that's out there, and we're just throwing it at marketing. We're throwing it at politicians, and it's having an impact.
It is, and it skews people's version of reality. We've seen that with, social media. Nobody posts their bad day on social media, right? The day the car won't start. I mean, okay, some people would go on and whine about it, but nobody brags about it, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's adding to the whole social strife thing as well. Everybody else's life looks perfect, and here I am, my car won't start. It's 10 below.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. This guy's got thousands to throw around on a free or on a private plane ride. I can't afford to put new tires on my car.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that part, because there's an outfit in LA, and I can't remember the name of it to save my life right now. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I know exactly where you're going with this.
It's in a warehouse, and it's the inside of a private jet that they mocked up in this warehouse that influencers go and rent to make it look like they're on this private jet.
Yeah.
Nothing's real anymore.
Dress for success, right?
Yeah, that's it, man. Fake it till you make it. I see Tony's on. Thank you, sir, for joining us. John Shriver, what's he have to say about his first house here?
When I bought my first home in 1973, John, let's not talk about how old I was in 1973. For $29K, the interest rate was 7%, and I borrowed the down payment from my favorite aunt. I didn't even comprehend that it was high. No, it was just the normal interest rate. I'll bet you comprehended it a decade later when you were looking at 10%, 12%.
And let me throw this out there. Right now, I believe the 30-year mortgage is running about 6.7% nationally, somewhere in that range. Historically, that's still low.
Yeah.
But people, oh my gosh, it's so high. Well, we're humans. We look at shorter time periods, right? So the 7%, wasn't historically high, looking back now, John. But let's also look at the price of the house, $29,000. That's the value of sound money. And what happened in 71 is when we went off the gold standard, right?
Yeah. I was a foster child, and my foster mother bought her house in 1967 for $35,000. It's in Sunnyvale, California. It's walking distance to the local high school. It is a ranch, 3-bedroom, postage stamp size lot, but it's in the Silicon Valley. She still lives in that house, and the last appraisal I heard was 1.25.
Oh,
yeah, 1.25 million on that house.
Wow. And so I look at that. We can have these discussions about CPI and PPI and all that stuff, but to your point earlier, how do regular people afford that?
Yeah.
I mean, the down payment on it, if you do 10%, the down payment is on $125,000.
Cash.
How does a regular person put together $125,000?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a question I ask all the time is, having grown up in the Bay Area, how does a person work at 7-Eleven or work at a gas station or work in a grocery store and afford to live there?
Yeah.
And what I found out is that the vast majority of them are, like, I had a cousin that was a waitress out there, and she lived in San Francisco in a 2-bedroom house with 8 people, 4 people to a bedroom, 8 people. And she was in her late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah.
I was like, that's crazy. Who lives
Yeah.
like that?
I mean, that's not literally, but figuratively, that's third world stuff, right? Yeah. Obviously living in much better conditions, not living in squalor. Well, hold on. It is San Francisco.
But you get a half a shelf in the refrigerator for your food.
Right. I mean, I don't want to live like that, but yeah, whatever. So
that's why I don't live in San Francisco anymore.
Yeah. All right. So as we dig into our CPI stuff here, we'll retouch that point when we get to the end of this, because this is the academic side. So CPI came out this last week, came in higher than expected. They rose 0.3% in December. That's a month-over-month number. So from November to December, went up 0.3%. And the annual rate, so looking back a year ago, December, went up 3.4%. So let's take a look at the estimated versus the actual here. They were expecting the month-over-month to be 0.2%, came in at 0.3%. That one you can see big divergences on because the numbers are small. So it's off by 50%, but you can even dig into the numbers. Was it 0.32, 0.27? We're not going to bore you guys to death with that. And then the year over year went from 3.2 to 3.4. So, okay, it came in hotter than expected. We can all feel that out there, to your point about gas prices and things. But this is also where I think definitely the politicians, I think most of America gives the Fed too much credit on what they can and cannot control. The Fed can't control oil prices, right? And oil, as we talked about, flows through to everything. There's gas prices, diesel prices, and then, of course, that affects every delivery out there. So there's things that are outside of the Fed's control. My concern going forward is if something pops off in the Middle East, and not necessarily the huge World War III shooting war, but say oil prices go back up to 90 a barrel, and let's say the Red Sea continues to be shut down, so longer travel times for these ships with goods on them. Well, that starts driving inflation up again. The Fed raising interest rates isn't going to change that, right? So at some point, we have to admit that we are susceptible to these world events. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I mean, look at these knuckleheads, the Houthis, right? They're driving the fact that we've got all kinds of multiple nations have all kinds of ships now that have to deploy there and have to smack these guys around. Maersk has come out and said they're going to stop shipping through the Red Sea because of these guys. They're not willing to take the risk. Well, now all of a sudden you have a bunch of these guys living in mud huts out in the desert that are having impacts on global economies.
Yes.
And talk about your outsized impact. Now, quick question about this 0.3%. That feels like a big rise in a month. Is it?
Yeah, that's annualized, times 12 there, obviously 3.6%. So we've had months where it was bigger back when inflation was accelerating upside. We had months where it was over 1%. But that's an outlier. If we run the numbers backwards, if inflation was running 1%, that would be 1/10% ish month over month. So 0.3 is substantial. People will feel that.
And last year, what was the inflation rate in 2023? Do we know yet?
Overall for the year, we don't know yet. Those numbers will come out. This was we don't know yet.
Okay. Do we have any kind of indicator that it's 20%?
I would expect it to be running about this 3.5% somewhere in there because the December numbers haven't come out yet.
Right. So what that represents, let's just for the purposes of discussion say it was 3.4% last year. Okay. Unless you got a 3.4% raise over the course of last year, your buying power, your ability to spend has just gone down 3.4%.
Correct.
And it was 3.5% the year before, and it was similar the year before. And so over time, over the course of 3 years, you're making 10% less than you were. Over the course of 10 years, you're making 30% less than you were.
Yep.
I think this is why we see so many 2-income families is the norm now.
Yes. And this is a great time to bring in that point we were talking about before. So to your point, Pete, let's just say, and let's not do compounding on this to keep it simple. Let's say it was 3.4% a year for 3 years. That's a 10% increase, right? Well, people's pay didn't go up 10% in that period of time. So they're feeling it day in, day out. And let's talk a little bit about how CPI is put together. So CPI, Consumer Price Index, inflation, is a combination of all kinds of things. There's gas, there's eggs, there's milk, there's housing, there's all these things that go in there, right?
And they take an average of those prices and differences, and that's how they come up with the CPI.
Exactly.
Right?
And each thing is weighted differently. You know, used cars are weighted differently than durable goods. Durable goods are your washer, dryer, refrigerator meant to last more than 5 years. So,
This seems rife for manipulation.
oh, it is. It is very manipulated. But it also, you know, unless a person needed to buy a used car, let's say used car prices went down. Let's say used car prices would have gone down enough last year to make the CPI zero. But for whatever reason, used car prices crashed, but the price of food went up 15%, just making up a number, right?
Okay.
Well, which one do you feel day to day?
Right.
You feel the food day to day. Unless you had to go buy a car,
Right.
you don't, that doesn't affect your life. And I think this is where we're seeing our split between the academics and the policymakers and the real people. Because they'll say, well, durable goods prices went down 4% last year. Totally made that up, by the way.
Sure.
Well, that's great, but if I don't need a washer, dryer, freezer, or refrigerator,
Right.
it has zero effect on my life. Egg prices went up 9% in December. Well, I feel that.
Yeah.
Right? So this is where we get this. I think we're seeing more of this disconnect between policymakers going, we're getting CPI under control, and regular people going, no, you're not. Because I got to feed my family,
Right.
and egg prices are up 9%. That is a real number, by the way.
I can go without buying another car. Like, use my example, or me as an example. I'm not in the market for a house, so prices of houses and borrowing money for houses doesn't impact me right now. I'm
Right.
not in the market for a new car or a used car. Both of my cars are in good shape. I'm all set. So those numbers don't impact me. I
Yep.
wouldn't mind getting another motorcycle or a newer motorcycle, but right now, given the way things are, you know what? I'm just going to keep riding the one I've got.
Yep.
But like you say, I got to buy eggs every week, right?
Yep.
And so I see those numbers. I I got to buy gas all the time, and
Right.
I see those numbers.
Yep.
So you
And
make a very good point there.
And when those numbers are hurting your budget day to day, that affects people's decision making on these other bigger ticket items,
True.
right? And
True.
then that affects when Dr. Fuller doesn't go buy the new motorcycle. Well, that affects the manufacturing jobs, right? So this is where I think we're starting to see a disconnect between academics and real people, and or yet another, depending on how you want to look at it.
Because meanwhile, while you and I are having, you know, oh, do I buy this or can I buy that? My budget is having this impact. I've got a guy on TV telling me, hey, the economy's great. You know, the Biden economic miracle is happening today. And then, you know, I've got other talking heads on TV telling me all about how, well, we got the CPI under control and this and that. And I'm like, well, you guys say this, but my lived experience is vastly different. And that's going to undermine my trust in what you have to say.
Yep. Yep. And we can also see this if we dig into, I don't have any slides on it. Well, if we dig into GDP numbers, gross domestic product, the economy, they'll say, well, and this is what I can't find my tinfoil hat at the moment, but this is a little tinfoil hatish, but I think what they're going to do, and I'm not too out there on this because it's what has been happening to a large extent, is part of the GDP is government spending. So if the government just keeps throwing enough money out there, they can keep the GDP positive. Now, the national debt will continue to skyrocket past the 34 trillion it is now. But technically, we won't go into a recession because they will just keep shoving money into the system.
And a shooting war would be good for that.
It would be, yes. And this would be a further disconnect, though, because you'd have the academics and the politicians saying, see, we didn't have a recession because the GDP didn't go down for 2 quarters in a row. But all of us out here in the real world are going, yeah, that's a great number y'all got there, but I'm hurting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's all well and good, but I haven't had meat this week.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Let's
like
knock out some comments here. What's Alan Kelly have to say?
Reference oil prices. Isn't there a lag or a little lag when price per barrel goes up or down? So when OPEC and others drop production, will that cause gas prices to go up unless demand goes down and counteracts those prices?
Yep. 30 days is the answer to your question, Alan. 30 days from a change in oil price to the change in pump price is the standard number there. Tony says we should have narrated this by Rod Serling.
If only it was fantasy. If only it was science fiction designed to scare.
Yeah, sadly, it is all too real. And this is a great point. What's Don saying?
The disconnect also exists between urban and suburban rural populations. They have different fuel needs along with durable goods. That's very true. Yes. And I find that, in my experience at least, you get a lot more sniveling, whining, complaining, a lot more vocal input, let's say, from the suburban and the urbanites than you do from the rural population folks. Those folks, in my experience at least, they don't holler until they're really hurting.
Right.
You know, they tend to just knuckle up and get it done, get the job done.
Yep, for sure.
But I think that as a result, you end up getting a lot of policies that are tilted towards urban populations.
Yep, and I think Rich had a guest on quite some time ago that gave a great analogy about why urban areas tend to be more, I'll say liberal, but more government dependent might be a better way to say it. And that is that if a tree goes down on my road out here, me and my buddies are, knocking each over to see who gets to our chainsaw first to cut it up and take it out of the road.
Right.
In the cities, they call somebody, right? They couldn't start a chainsaw if their lives depended on it. So they go, well, hey, it's working. This government dependency thing works. I call somebody, they come out, they do the heavy lifting, they take care of it. I pay my tax bill. Life is good. And so then it tends to drive them more that way. Whereas out here, if I called somebody and said, hey, there's a tree down across the road, come out here and cut it up, it'd probably be day after tomorrow before they got to it if there was a number of these trees coming down because of a big storm.
Well, yeah, and it would have to be a serious tree. I mean, you're not calling anybody for a 6-inch wide tree that's on your road. Like you said, you're getting your chainsaw and cutting up and getting done because you don't want to wait a day and a half.
Exactly. Yep. So it's an interesting dichotomy that happens between, so I'll say, suburbanites and those of us in more rural areas.
Yeah. So, and another way to look at it too, to be honest, is our mega cities that we have today just can't exist without governance. Mm-hmm. I mean, anything over 250,000 is, unless the government is running some things, it's just not going to happen. It's going to collapse in on itself.
Yep.
So to a certain extent, I understand it, but that's also why I don't want to live in a big city.
Yeah, you and me both.
Reasons.
Yep. One of many. So Gerald brings up a point here. It says, until CDs go down in my credit union, I know there are issues. So let's dig into this a little bit. So he's talking about the interest rate on CDs. So we've talked about bank health in the past, and we gave you guys that website you could go to check out the health of your bank or a bank you're looking at doing business with. The one thing that would raise my antenna that a bank maybe isn't doing well is if they're offering way higher interest rates for savings accounts or CDs than other banks are, because they need that liquidity. They need that money. They're guaranteeing you, say, 6% when the going rate for a CD is 5%, but they need that money in there. Does that make sense?
It does.
So if you run across, this bank's got a killer deal. They're paying 9.5% on a CD right now. That is the last place I would put my money. So, but there's a reason.
At least the last place you would put any money that you weren't willing to lose.
Right. Now, there's the FDIC protections and those things for sure. However, I'm not sure I want to, have a significant amount of money in there and wait that out. Right. So there's a reason, like JP Morgan, their CD rates, I haven't looked in the last, 6 months or so, but they were paying significantly less interest for CDs than other banks because they didn't need the money. So that tells me they're healthy. So
that's where you put your long-term large amounts of money.
It's inside a JP Morgan account because they're one of the GSIBs, globally systemic important banks. In other words, too big to fail. It is in the Dodd-Frank law that those banks will be bailed out. Period.
Okay, there you go. Must be nice, right?
Exactly.
How do I get my name in there?
Just call up a JP Morgan rep and tell me you want to open an account.
I want to be on that law.
Oh, you want to be on that law? Yeah.
Fuller will all be bailed out if they need it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how to get on that list.
Yeah,
I
I'm
wish I
pretty sure
knew
the
that
government's
one.
not coming to save me.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I think Ted brings up a great point here. What's he say?
I remember not drinking water in a plastic bottle. Drinking water was free. Added many expenses not known 30 years ago. Mobile phones, streaming utilities would never go down. Now he's got a good point. I
Yeah.
mean, look at the way, look at houses when you were a kid.
Mhm.
I don't know your circumstances growing up. I know mine. I was all alone, but all the people I knew with brothers and sisters, they shared rooms. The houses were smaller. Go look at a house that was built in the 60s.
Yep.
They were just smaller houses because you lived in them and then you left, right?
Yep.
You went there, you ate, you slept, and you left.
Yep.
You were outside, you're doing other things. Drinking water in a public tap. That's right. Now it's all plastic bottles. And look at me with my lowered green or lowered carbon footprint in my steel mug that I refill with water.
Yep.
Yeah.
And yes, the counter argument there, if you want to make it, is our quality of life has gone up through, say, cell phones and things like that, and the houses being bigger. But to your point, all that's got to get paid for. Right. So,
and how much of it do we really need? Right. I mean, how many? I've got an 8-year-old, 9-year-old son, and he's got friends with cell phones.
Yeah,
that's ridiculous.
It is.
I mean, remember when pagers came out? Oh, you must be an MD or a drug dealer. Right?
Yeah, I was one of the two. And look at cars. Remember the old Chevy S10 pickups back in the day? You could, I think those were like $6,000 or $7,000. Like, granted, wages were lower, but it was a basic truck, crank windows, heat, no AC. But a young person could go buy a brand new truck and have reliable transportation. Now, I mean, I'm looking in the market for a truck probably sometime later this year. Good luck staying under 70 grand.
Yeah.
And it's got all these bells and whistles, but I'll tell you right now, if somebody built a decent sized overall good truck, I still want my Bluetooth. Okay. But I'd be perfectly happy with crank windows, right? It's one less thing to break. And when it breaks, I can fix it a whole lot easier. It doesn't cost me a $400 motor.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? I can't do anything in my truck, right? I open it up, I look inside, I'm like, well, yeah. And then you go to the mechanic, and what's he do? Plugs in a machine, looks at the machine, goes, oh yeah.
Yeah. It's this, that'll be $4,000, please.
Right. Yeah. I've got a window that doesn't work in my truck right now because the electrical harness in that particular door is defunct. Okay. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. $650, we'll replace it. Like,
yeah.
Can you put in a crank?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think I've told you guys. I got a 77 Blazer. I love that truck.
Nice.
The window cranks, right? And if you need air conditioning, there's that little triangle window.
Yeah, the wing window. Oh,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. There's your AC right there.
Yeah, I keep telling my wife what I want most in the world is a Volkswagen thing.
Yes.
Those little Kugelwagen staff cars that the Germans cruised around.
Yes, absolutely.
You can fix that with a hammer and a wrench.
That's it right there. Alan Kelly here says a lot of major cities have already collapsed or very close to collapse.
And that's just from mismanagement.
Yeah.
You haven't run into any true shortages, true problems, nobody dropping bombs on them if we get into a shooting war with the Chinese.
Yeah.
Just simple, poor management has run these cities into the ground.
Well, and I think poor management also, if we look at the illegal immigration side of things, say in New York City, Chicago right now, for a lot of years, they were divorced from their policies. So they had these sanctuary city policies, but never had to deal with the consequences of these policies. But Governor Abbott down in Texas sure has changed that.
Yeah, I still say that's a brilliant move. I mean, I hate using human beings as capital and as a cudgel to beat people over the head. But like you said, it was very easy to say we're a sanctuary city when you're getting 500 people a year into a city of 8 million.
Yep.
When all of a sudden buses of people are being dumped into your city streets day after day after day after day because you have that policy.
Yeah.
Well, now you got the governor and the mayor saying, "Hey, my God, the city's going to collapse if this keeps up."
Yep.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Take some responsibility for your stuff.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
All right. So one thing I want to touch on here. This is still back to our CPI stuff. So now we're going to talk about core CPI, Dr. Fuller. Core strips out energy and food because those tend to be more volatile. So when we look at the core, it's all the CPI stuff minus food and energy. Now, this is an academic thing. because the non-core things, the energy and food, that's what we feel all the time. Right. So this is where we get more into that divorce between academics and real people. In the past, food and energy would actually bring, let me make sure I say this correctly. Food and energy would bring core CPI would be lower than overall CPI.
Because they were consistent, I assume.
Exactly, because they don't move as much, because they're not as volatile. But now it's starting to turn back the other way. Actually, it's not starting to. It has been for quite some time. If we look up here on our chart, the CPI year over year, actual 3.4% there. The core is higher at 3.9 there at the bottom.
Significantly higher.
Significantly higher. So for decades, they used the core to say, well, we're hitting our inflation target because food and energy are volatile. Well, now it's come back to bite them in the butt over the last year or so because the core has actually been higher, and their goal is a 2% CPI inflation rate. Well, it's going to get harder to get down because food and energy are actually dragging CPI down right now, not making it higher. So they've actually made their job harder this time around.
And what is contributing to the volatility in the cost of food? I mean, energy, I can kind of understand, oil, sure, it's traded and this and that, but the food is a lot. That encompasses a lot.
It does.
And I remember last summer and maybe for a year before that, we were hearing a lot about different food plants going up in flames, having strange accidents. People were getting a little bit tinfoil hatty about that. But when you start looking at just the raw numbers of these factories and whatnot going up, you kind of start to scratch your head. Is that contributing to this, or is it transportation costs going up, or what's going on with food?
I think it's not only transportation costs, because now it's a good point you bring up, because a change in oil prices not only affects us at the pump, it then magnifies through every other supply chain, right? And food is very transportation intensive because here in Wisconsin, when it's 10 below, if I go down to the store and buy strawberries, they didn't pick them 10 miles south of me, right? Yeah. There's a lot of transportation involved there.
And we forget packaging too, right? I mean, a lot of the packaging is plastic, which is a petroleum-based product, so that's going to end up going up as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the labor costs. We've seen what labor costs have done. I mean, I know a number of people in the food business, and what they're having to pay people just to show up is insane. So that they're going to get their money back out of that on that retail.
They have to, right? They're not a charity. Yeah. They have to stay viable. I mean, what's the option? They go under?
Right. So all that plays into it. So we're still a long ways away from hitting our 2% inflation target. And let's also remember this latest CPI report, it went back up. CPI, it been on a downward march for a while. It went back up on this one. So we went, so this is now the Fed's between a rock and a hard place. If they lower rates now, it's going to be like 1974 all over again, and inflation is going to take off to the upside. So if they raise rates, they're going to crush something from here. So
it's pain no matter which way we go.
It is. It is. It's just a matter of which pain you want. Now, maybe it's a little tinfoil hat-ish. I think they're going to let inflation run for quite a while because the best way to get rid of debt is to inflate it away. And there's only one way we pay off there's two ways we pay off a $34 trillion debt. One is default, and the other one is to inflate it away.
And it's a lot of inflation for a long time, brother.
It is. It really is. But there's depends on how high that inflation rate gets too. And I don't think we're going to see the 70s over again. I think J-Dog, Jerome Powell, really wants to be Volcker 2.0, not Arthur Burns 2.0. Burns was the Fed chairman who lowered interest rates under political pressure from Nixon in 70, whatever it was. As Nixon was coming up on re-election, so it would have been 74. And that was when inflation really took off. They were starting to get it under control. So, so we'll see what happens here. Now, that said, this whole thing with the U.S. dollar, it's a Ponzi scheme. It is. I mean, 34 trillion in debt. There aren't enough digital and real dollars in the world to pay off 34 trillion. It doesn't happen, right?
Yeah. What is it they say that, you borrow $1 million from a bank, the bank owns you. You borrow $1 billion from the bank, you own the bank.
Yep.
So there's probably some element of that to all of this.
Absolutely.
I think it might be a good time to point out too that what does all this mean in terms of our ability, self-defense and whatnot. It certainly argues in favor of being prepared, right? Purchasing bulk items to ensure yourself against price spikes and a lack of availability. We've seen that happen very, very quickly in the past.
Yes.
I think it also is going to hit the people at the bottom end of the socioeconomic pyramid the hardest.
Bingo.
Right. Yep. Guys like you and I are fortunate enough to be able to absorb a lot of these costs, to make changes in optional purchases, to forego, luxuries. A good example I always use is the tires thing. If I need new tires on my truck and it costs me $1,200 to buy 4 tires, good tires with good warranties and everything else, and a couple hours to go sit in the shop to get them put on. Okay. I mean, it sucks. I don't want to do it, but nobody's going without food and
right.
Sustenance around my house. I'm not having to balance, well, if I do that, I can't pay my heat bill. That doesn't happen in my world. But I recognize that I'm not in a socioeconomic category where I was as a child, where, first of all, you're not getting $1,200 worth of tires. You might buy a tire. You might buy 2 tires. And, oh, by the way, that means we're eating top ramen for the next 2 weeks until I get paid again, or until, mom gets paid again. Yeah. And that is going to drive, in some extreme cases, criminal behavior, right? You're going to see an uptick in criminality as a result of this.
Yep. And on a more day-to-day basis, you're going to see people angry, frustrated, right? And that's going to come out in the social world. I don't mean social media. It's going to come out whether it's protests, riots, elections, those things. And that's where it comes
to interactions with people. I mean, how many times in the last year, look at your own life, have you run into people that were just inexplicably grumpy, angry, more prone toward being confrontational? I've seen it all the time now. And I live in the South, where people are, they take interpersonal courtesy to a whole new level out here. I mean,
you guys do. Yeah.
Right. Yep. And I'm not saying every person I run into is like that, because there is a sense that, look, we're all in the same ocean going storm together, not necessarily on the same boat, but we're all in the same storm. Yeah. But I've run into a lot more people that are a lot more belligerent than current circumstance might dictate.
Right. I agree. And we're seeing it with everything. Don here says, excuse me, the folks at the bottom of the financial pyramid are also quick to anger because they feel they have little left to lose.
Yeah. And we have that honor culture that Rich has spoken of several times too. I mean, if you get to a point where you have nothing else but your honor and your dignity, you're going to be a lot more prone to defend that honor and to take offense at slights on your dignity.
And those slights, it can be, that's how road rage happens, right? Yeah. Oh my gosh. You can wave and say, hey man, I'm sorry I cut you off. But he has to agree that's the end of it at that point.
Sure.
There's a saying out there, and I can't remember who started it. I certainly didn't. It says when people have nothing left to lose, they lose it.
That's succinct and to the point and accurate, right?
Right.
But it also makes us so rife for political movements and isms, right? When people get into this point, the isms start popping back up. Oh, your life sucks. Well, it's because of those polka dot guys that live down the street, and they have the nice cars and their kids go to the good schools and they've got all the money because they're polka dots.
Right.
And define polka dot however you want, but a guy with an agenda can come in and we've seen it time and time again, locally and nationally, where people can come in and say it's, they underscore that difference between the us and the them, and they turn the them into villains. And then we can all sort of get behind the idea that we're defending our group, our in group, against the out group.
Yes.
Nothing good comes of that.
Yep. Oh yeah, that's how you get really bad things happening in history,
Yeah.
right? So
and people just make their decisions not necessarily based on the good of the world or the good of the nation, but like we've talked about so many times, on the good of my kids.
mhm.
Right? My
Yep.
kids are going to bed hungry.
Right.
That's got to stop. I
Yep.
got to fix that.
Yep.
And
And then and same for you and me and every other parent on here. If the kids are hungry, they're going to eat.
Yeah.
And we can all sympathize with that. Until suddenly we're the ones with a gun stuck in our face.
Right. And so that's why, I think it's important for us to keep an eye on these large scale numbers that, again, for a lot of us, I can understand what you're saying, but this isn't my bailiwick, right? So I need it explained to me, and I need to point out that, look, this is what's coming down the line. The economy is going to do this. It's not getting better anytime soon.
Yep.
Decide how you.
In fact, I think it's going to get worse here over the course of the next 6 months.
It's going to get worse before it gets worse.
Exactly. Right? Confidence is that feeling you have right before all hell breaks loose.
Yeah. And don't look to the government to come and save you. Right? They're clearly out for themselves, and they're more interested in re-election than they are in making things better.
Yep.
Anybody who says they're going to give you something for nothing is generally going to give you nothing for something.
Yep.
They're going to. So.
Yeah.
So this all further indicates to me that you just need to be more self-reliant.
Absolutely. Food storage is my big one. Matter of fact, I hope you guys can't hear it. I tried to cover it up. I got my freeze dryer running over here right now for exactly that reason. So
you invested in a freeze dryer.
I did, yes. Harvest Right, I think, is the only company that makes the home models. It is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is great. It takes a while to run a batch. It takes about 24 hours, but you get freeze dried food.
Right. And you just keep running it, right? So
I just keep running. Yeah, it's pretty much on a continuous loop. With the remodeling now, it's stuck over here next to me, so I hope it's not making too much noise.
I can't hear it at all.
Okay, excellent. So Alan Kelly here says in 73 and 74, prices were going up. OPEC fuel embargoes, gas lines, odd and even fill-up days. I'd forgotten about those.
I remember those.
Mom fixing beans, cornbread multiple times a week. Could history repeat? Yeah, it'll rhyme at least, right?
We'll all be figuring out why our grandparents used to rinse out tinfoil.
Exactly right.
I remember growing up in a full set of salad dishes with just a bunch of Cool Whip containers.
Yep, for sure. We never had Tupperware when I was growing up. It was you open the Cool Whip container, you never knew it was going to be Cool Whip or green beans. One was very disappointing. So what's Gerald say here?
People that donate to food banks and the needy that make medium incomes are no longer donating. Yeah, and that's just a fiscal reality, right? I mean, as that fiscal tension rises, the people that are on the edge that were making contributions, it just becomes a reality they can't.
Right.
That's hardly surprising.
Yep.
And that's further going to affect the people that are further down the socioeconomic food chain.
Right, for sure. Ted brings up a point here I want to dig into for a second. Local social media daily posting of vehicles and plates who upset someone. Comments crying for the sheriff to bust them. I didn't join it on Facebook, but there's an outfit that people, when somebody parks like a jerk, people take pictures of it, and there's a Facebook page about this. Like, I can't remember, it's called Parking Morons or whatever it is. I can't remember. And the plate number is clearly visible. And in today's world, I don't have to tell you, you can go find out who that is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, seriously, we're down to that point in our society. Somebody parks like a jerk and they do that.
Yeah. Because it's anonymous, right? I'm hiding behind my computer screen. You see that all over the place.
Yep.
It always worries me when people start saying, well, there ought to be a law and we ought to call the police. Because now you're saying that, okay, to use your example, and I don't know that anybody's actually saying this, but call the sheriff, get the cops out here. So what you're saying is, because of the way this guy parked, you want to invoke the state's monopoly on violence to come out here and correct this behavior.
Yep.
Right? Because that's what it's all based on.
Right.
Is you get a ticket, you have to pay the ticket, right? If you don't pay the ticket, you get another ticket, and eventually some couple of big dudes are going to show up with handcuffs and buckle you up and take you off to the hoosegow and force you to go to jail.
Yeah.
So all laws are based on that foundation. And when people start saying, we got to arrest that guy, his dog's barking, or, what, I'm like, that's just not a good thing. That's not a good idea.
Yep. But again, does that go back to our previous discussion about urbanites versus rural? I know out here by me, if somebody's dog's barking too much, I'm gonna go knock on the door and say,
Right.
"Hey, yo, Joe, can you get control of your dog, please? We're out here having a fun time, and the dog's barking."
Thank you.
You know, out in suburbanite though, we call the cops.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think, but to a certain extent, I understand. One, these people are very non-confrontational, and having a conversation where someone might say, "Hey, pound sand, pal." Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But I will say this: someone cuts me off on the road. I started driving in the '80s, right? I honk at them. Hey, what are you doing?
Yeah.
My wife gets so irritated with me when I do that. She's like, Jesus, the kids are in the car. I'm like, I honked my horn. She said, you don't know if they're crazy. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Now, in my head, what I'm saying is they would have to stop, bail out of their car, and I'm just going to leave, or they're going to have to chase me, in which case I'm going to a police department. Could they ram me? Well, I'm probably not the guy you want to get into that. You want to go down that particular rabbit hole with.
Yep, agreed.
But I see her point, right? People are tense and angry, like we discussed earlier, and you just never know if they're crazy.
Yeah.
But I'm like you. I mean, if somebody speeds down my little cul-de-sac, I'm not quite old enough to stand there and go, "This is a neighborhood," and shake my fist at them. I'll be there in a few years. But I'll go and I'll stand in the middle of the road and I'll stop and say, "Hey, can you slow it down?"
Yeah.
And people will get angry, like, "Who the hell?"
Yeah.
Telling me.
Yep. And then that goes back to, as a society, we've lost the ability to have that interpersonal conversation. Be like, "Hey, dude, I'm sure you're just having a bad day or whatever, but I got kids here. Can you just tone it down a little bit when you drive through here?"
Right. Or your live music or whatever. Yeah. And people just aren't used to doing that, and they don't have the level of connection with their neighbors to say, "Hey, Fred, what the hell, man?"
Right. Exactly.
I live in a neighborhood with 88 people or 88 houses, and it is common that a package will get delivered to the wrong house. And I know my address, and there's a package at my desk, my front door that has, it's the guy next door, the guy across the street. What do? I walk over there and leave it on his doorstep, right? Yeah. Or I knock on his door. Hey, what happens in my neighborhood all the time is people will take a picture of the box, put it on the neighborhood Facebook page, and say, "Hey, this came to my house. If it's yours, please come get it." What? Really?
Yeah.
Because they don't know their neighbor.
Right.
They don't walk down the street and meet these people.
Yeah.
And I think that's more and more common if you start macroing it out to
and it also becomes easier to make selfish decisions, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't have to talk to the people that your decisions affect, whether that be like in a bigger city. I voted for so and so is going to take care of those polka dot people. Well, it's a lot harder if you have to go down to the polka dot person and say, "Hey, I'm coming for your stuff."
Right.
Or
I can park like a jerk because I don't care about your social media group that says I'm a jerk for parking like it. There's no repercussion for me, so what do I care?
Yep, exactly. So
and we don't have that social connectivity that builds up the idea that you need to be socially responsible. You do have a responsibility to your neighbors and your community to not act like an ass.
Exactly. Boy, is that the truth here. So now that we've gone far afield on that,
right. We're still in our time here.
That's all good. So back to our CPI here. It says, despite the higher than expected inflation readings, futures traders, stock future traders, continue to assign a strong, futures traders continue to assign a strong possibility the Fed would start cutting interest rates in March. Now, my question here is why? My theory on this is they know by then we're going to have some really bad economic numbers come out, and therefore the Fed will be cutting because things could swing the other way. So
could this also be an attempt at them saying to kind of push the Fed to cut rates?
Yes, the market will absolutely try to bully the Fed. Basically, if you don't lower interest rates, the stock market's going to go way down. Blah blah blah. Honestly, I don't think Powell cares. He's very good at signaling what he's going to do. He came out of private equity. He ran big money before he went to the Fed, which is why his changes are very well telegraphed. He will have the other Fed presidents go out and give speeches and talk about things. there hasn't been a thing Powell's done since he got there that hasn't been well telegraphed. So,
Well, and the last thing you really want, especially in American financial markets, is sudden shifts and twists and turns.
and sudden and unexpected.
Yeah.
Right. So
you want a steady ship here, right? We want a steady hand at the helm.
Exactly right. So let's bear in mind, though, also Powell is the one that this was a big comment when they asked him how he was navigating these interest rate changes. And he said, I'm paraphrasing this, I'm going to butcher it to some extent. He said, well, sometimes it's like celestial navigation under cloudy skies. Huh. So he said the quiet part out loud. And the point is that a lot of times they don't know either because they don't know what the future is going to bring with all these other factors.
Remember when we were kids and we thought adults had it all figured out?
Yeah.
Now we're adults and we think the Fed's got it all figured out.
Yeah. It's like the meme I saw on Facebook when I was a kid. I talked about how I couldn't wait to grow up. That was stupid.
Yeah, right. That was the dumbest thing I ever came up with.
No doubt. So along those same lines, what people are feeling, credit card delinquencies surpass pre-pandemic levels.
Jeez.
So, and you look at these numbers, and I was even struck by, 3% of credit card balances were 30 days late.
Yeah, that seems like a low number.
It is, but it's higher than pre-pandemic. So now bear in mind, this means the person's not even making the minimum payment. So
it's funny because if you'd asked me that just out of the blue, I would have said, the average might be 10 or 12% that people are 30 days late. So that's interesting. I mean, I recognize that, yes, that's a big difference from pre-pandemic, but it seems like an objectively small percentage.
It is, and I was surprised by it as a matter of fact as well. I'm going to do some more digging on this and see where it's at. What I look at, whether it be stocks or numbers like these, is I don't always look so much at the raw numbers, the 3.19%, or pick any of these other numbers. Watch the rate of change.
Yeah, what you have there in yellow.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so that's dramatic.
Exactly. These changes are up basically 15% across the board for 30 days, 60 day, and 90 day past due on credit cards. Now, bear in mind, up until a person is 90 days past due, if they have remaining credit on that card, they can still use the card. Now, the fees and everything are exorbitant, but they can still use it.
And this is up 15% over.
Let me see here.
The quarter before.
I'm gonna say this is year-over-year numbers is my guess.
Okay.
I don't think I got it into this. Let me see if I got it in here. I'm gonna guess these are year-over-year numbers.
Okay.
So let's dig into this one since I bounced over to it. We're down to, this is as of the third quarter of 2023. Basically, a third of people pay off their credit cards in full every month. We're down to that. That's the lowest since the fourth quarter of 22. Now, let's think about fourth quarter of 22. There was a ton of stimmy checks rolling around.
Right.
A lot of people were able to pay that off every month. Yeah. So we're not seeing a good trend here. Our rate of change is not going in a happy direction. So the middle part here that's circled, the delinquency rates exceeded those during the fourth quarter of 2019, pre-pandemic, and are close to setting a high for the series that started in 2012. Now, so the data series, meaning the delinquencies, that they didn't start keeping that data until 2012. That was after the housing crisis. That was pretty close to the bottom in 2012. So this is not moving in a happy direction here, guys.
Yeah, and of course that impacts all kinds of things for people when they start crushing their credit rating by being delinquent, by not paying their bills.
Correct.
And there's all kinds of downstream effects of that.
There are, and this is also why we're seeing the continued rise of BNPL, buy now, pay later, because they don't do credit checks.
Yeah.
And Walmart, I think, has 4,500 locations now that at the self-serve kiosk, you can do buy now, pay later.
At the self-serve kiosk.
At the self-serve kiosk. You plug in your data and you can do buy now, pay later for your groceries. And that is what people are doing.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what's more terrifying, the fact that they're in financial straits that force them to do that, or the idea that they will do that. buying your food on credit, that just,
and it's even worse than credit because it's just
yeah.
And the interest rates on the BNPL, you'll see it all the time. The big one is Affirm, is the company that does buy now pay later. There's a lot of them out there. However, you'll see it. I went and bought a new engine for my toy car, and I could do buy now pay later for the engine, and it's 4 equal payments. You see it on Amazon quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you make those payments at 0% interest, no big deal. You miss a payment, I believe the average interest rate on BNPL is something like 32%. Oh yeah, it's insane. Yeah, it's like, oh, it gives you right here, right?
It really does.
Yeah. So
wow.
Yeah, BNPL is that's like the new payday title loans.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So except you don't have to put anything up, which makes it easier for people who don't understand what they're falling into to get trapped.
Well, and the fact that there are a ton of companies out there doing this tells you that it's lucrative.
Yeah. You can even do buy now, pay later on Etsy. Seriously.
On Etsy. What are you buying on Etsy that's so expensive you got to do buy now, pay later?
Got me.
Wow.
So,
but that just goes to what we were saying earlier about luxury items. I mean, there's nothing on Etsy I need. There's some stuff on Etsy I want.
Yeah.
I have a great time looking at Etsy.
Yeah.
And then there I need.
Right.
You know, Etsy folds tomorrow. My kids aren't going to starve.
Exactly right. So now here's the one I had not seen this happen. Maybe it happened a little bit during COVID, but then as soon as the stimmy check started, it went away. We saw it a lot during the housing crisis. And this is banks are granting fewer credit line increases and reducing credit lines more frequently.
Yeah. It's getting harder to get a home loan, for example.
Yes. Yeah. Banks are tightening that down. And something that people, I think, underestimate is not just the interest rate. Going and getting a loan there's no guarantee of getting a loan, right? And that affects the money supply as well. The Fed can print all the money they want, but if the banks don't lend it out, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And we know the Fed isn't printing money right now. But if the banks aren't comfortable lending the money out, then it doesn't get out.
Right.
So now we saw this during the GFC with credit card companies. I had good credit. I was paying my bills, and I had one of my cards. I'd run up a good amount that month. I can't remember if it was a vacation month or what it was. But they went, oh, by the way, we're reducing your credit limit to exactly what your balance is right now.
Wow.
Yeah. And I went, hold on. I mean, I pay my bills, still got my job. And they went, yeah, don't care. It's a company-wide policy. They were reducing their risk.
Yeah.
So I remember that when it was time to figure out what to do for a credit card.
Right.
Yeah. Y'all want to play? It's fine. Goodbye.
Screw me. Now how about screw you? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
my minimum payment can be 0.
Exactly right. So, all right. Sorry, just looking at some comments here. All right, let's dig on here. So this is one. This is a forward-looking economic indicator, a leading indicator, if you will. This is ISM Institute. Gosh, I had to think about it. I had it a second ago. Anyway, this is manufacturing, new orders in manufacturing. And this is one of those numbers, TC, that anything under 50 is contractionary. Okay. And this looks back, each month it looks back to a year ago.
And these are manufacturing orders across the board or specific?
Across the board.
Okay.
All manufacturing. So it starts back in August of 22 and then is monthly through December of 23. Anything below 50 means there's fewer new orders.
Okay.
That's not a happy chart.
No, that's not a happy chart at all.
New orders become, manufacturing the work that manufacturers do going forward. Right. Let's say there's something that, I don't know, let's say it's a 90-day lead from the new order to the completion of whatever it is. Well, if new orders go down, you know what your business is going to be doing in 30, 60, 90 days, whatever it is for that business.
Right. Businesses contract, people get paid less, jobs go away, availability of products drops.
Right.
So that's going to have impacts across the economy.
Right. So since September of 22, each month this has been contractionary. So this tells me we're not headed in a happy direction when we're talking about all this, what's coming with the economy. Now, this, if the government prints enough money, right? And let's differentiate between the Fed printing money and the government printing money. It's two different things. So the government can, fund all this stuff, right? All these infrastructure projects and things like this, and they can juice these numbers back up, right? But this is the real world right here. So will this contribute to more of our dichotomy between what the academics see and what the real world feels? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
They can sing me all the sunshines and rainbows songs they want, but if I can't buy the widget that I need because it's not available, I mean, a year ago, I'd walk through a Harley dealership and there were 3 bikes on the floor.
Yeah.
Now you can go through and there's 30 or 40. But remember, last year we were talking about chips. You couldn't get cars with all the chips, and you couldn't get cars, period, or you couldn't get them with all the chips they were supposed to have.
Right.
This is sort of that same problem writ large, but that's how it sugars out in our actual lives.
Yep, absolutely. And Don bailed me out here. ISM is Institute for Supply Management. I thank you, sir.
There you go.
So to your point about the Harley dealership there, there was a time that if you wanted to go buy a new truck, you were paying over sticker for it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, now there's incentives out there to buy new trucks.
Mm-hmm.
They're giving, it wasn't a truck. It was, I forget which manufacturer it was. They're doing 1.9% financing. They're losing money when they loan you that money.
Right.
Right. And I was looking online last night, building a truck online, and it was something like $3,500 cash back or $6,500 cash back with a trade-in of a certain type.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, it's probably monthly. I get mailings from Ford saying, "Hey, you've got that truck you've had for 8-9 years now. You want to sell it? We'll give you a bunch of money for it."
Yeah.
They're trying desperately to get the used cars in there.
Yes, they are. So, speaking of preparedness, Alan Kelly said he's got to go, but he bought 2 new generators. Got to get prepped for the winter weather. Good for you, brother.
2 generators. Good on you. Can't hide money. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's talk about these payroll numbers here. I stole this chart off Eurodollar.University. So we've talked about it before, Dr. Fuller. You may recall they come up with initial numbers for whatever it is. In this case, it's going to be employment payrolls, and then they'll revise that number later. So here, very shortly, we'll come up with the December employment numbers. And then when the February report comes out with the initial January numbers, they'll go back and revise the December numbers. So it's always a 2-month lag back to the revision. Tracking? Okay. So now what we want to look at, it's become a running joke at this point. The market trades off the initial number, even though they know it's bovine excrement, because that's what they have to go off of. Rather than waiting another month to see what reality is, they trade off of that. So what we've got here, if we just look at this, the far left bar here, that's January of 23. The red dash part at the top of that was the initial report in each one of these bars. The black is the revision.
So we just don't ever hit. It always revises down, is what I'm saying.
In this case, yes. Historically, no.
Really?
Yes, historically, you'll have some above, some below. All right. And you'll notice there in July, about halfway through, it was real close.
Yeah.
Okay.
What happened in June? Good Lord.
Yeah, big miss.
How do you miss that? That's like 100% or more missed based on the size of that chart.
Okay, so if I affix my imaginary tinfoil hat, the BLS that puts this number out is part of the executive branch.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
There you go. So then these types of misses for this period of time, all in one direction, are unprecedented. And we expect the December number to do the same. So people say, well, employment's going up. Well, when you look at all this, if we go to the next chart here, over the course of 2023, not counting whatever revision happens for December 2023, it's a 443,000 job miss based on revisions. So
that didn't come out in any executive branch press releases or press conferences, did it?
nope, not at all. They won't talk about that in the least. They'll just keep talking about the initial numbers because it's going their way.
Right.
Historically, there's always revisions. There's always a miss. And in
Wasn't there
fairness,
a really big one right after the election, the last election?
yeah, they also do a once a year big revision.
Seems to me I remember you talking about that on this show.
Yes. Yep, we did. And also where some of these revisions come from is the birth death model. You ever heard of that one?
Mm-hmm. I've heard of it.
Okay, so birth death model
impacts here.
So the birth death model for jobs is about how many, like say somebody, they estimate 1,000 small businesses opened. And those small businesses employed 3,000 people. That number is completely made up. Seriously.
But we should make significant national economic decisions based on that made up number.
And guys, I'm not exaggerating at all. That number is completely made up.
Wow.
There is no science, there is no survey, there is no nothing behind the birth death model. It is their own estimation.
Wow.
Now, which way do you think they're going to estimate that? In their favor or against themselves?
I have an idea.
Yeah, I have a suspicion about which way that might go. So so typically, I mean, we're always going to see changes with revisions because they're trying to come up with a number within a few days after a month ends, right? In fairness, nobody could get that right. But if someone was making a good faith effort, it should be some above, some below, right? And you should be tracking about the same amount above and below in general, right? And yeah, you could have a huge snowstorm that affects some numbers or, a hurricane in Florida, right?
Right.
But to your point from earlier, you look at June, initially they said there were 209,000 new jobs created, and the revision took it down to 105. That was 100% miss. Right?
Yeah. So is there a political motivation that month that happened that made them do that?
I don't recall specifically.
Incompetence.
Some of both, probably.
I mean, because I worked for the government my entire professional life. Incompetence is an acceptable answer. Believe me.
Yeah, well, I've worked in private industry my entire life, and it is there too.
Sure. But you can get fired in private industry for that kind of shenanigans.
True.
It's harder than federal government.
Yep. So the point is, guys, when you see articles about employment or CPI or any of these, when you see the article, don't just look at the headline number. Take a moment, read further down in the article, and see what the revision was for 2 months ago.
Yeah,
that's
you look at this chart. The chart, and to me, it's just one more data point of why you don't trust information provided to you by experts in government.
Exactly. Because and in fairness to those individuals, I'm never going to use dishonesty, but they're being motivated to do things a certain way, right? And that's coming from above them.
No, it's true.
So what's Craig have to say here?
If you want to look at a collapsed economy, look at the UK. Our government doesn't know it's ours from its elbow.
Maybe we could make them a diagram, Craig.
I try not to comment on other countries' leadership because I don't like it when people in other countries comment on mine. But you guys could use some solid leadership over there in London. I got to be honest. It's been a while since you had an adult in charge over there, and I hate it for you. I really do, Craig.
And we know exactly how you feel about not having an adult in charge, too.
Yes, we do. I say this from a position of experience.
Yes, exactly. So what's Will Parker say there?
What is the percentage of new jobs that are just returning after Rona and bumbling Joe's policy? That's a good question. And from my limited, I'll defer to Will on this, but from my limited research on the topic, it's so hard to get solid numbers, dependable numbers on which to base the answer to that question. Yeah, I've played hell trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and there is no way to really figure it out. And honestly, the Rona stuff I think is pretty much gone at this point. As far as Bumbling Joe's policies, I believe those are continuing. So yeah, we'll see how that all shakes out.
Yeah, that worried me all through the Rona thing. Was I just couldn't get solid numbers on anything. Couldn't try to get solid numbers on Rona deaths. To this day, you can't get them because everybody had a different definition of what constituted a coronavirus death, state to state.
Yeah. Yep. And then, and while it's not causal, how many? I mean, we saw opioid overdose deaths spike during that same period of time. How much of that was because people there was nothing else to do for them? It's a sad state of affairs for them, and not something we are happy about, of course. But
our unemployment numbers now impacted by the people who were employed pre-pandemic that have opted not to seek employment post-pandemic.
Right. Those things all play into it, and it's almost impossible to track down a real number on those sorts of things. But there's so much gamesmanship within all these numbers anymore that then it's kind of like looking at Chinese economic numbers. They're all made up.
Right.
What you really look at more than anything is the trend. Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like whose line is it anyway? The points are made up and they don't matter.
They don't matter. Yeah.
Right.
And that's what the problem is, of course, is that they do matter.
Right. They do. And people are making investment decisions and policy decisions based on these numbers, and they're off by a lot. Right.
Which we just saw 100% in some cases.
Yeah. Yep. So it makes it tough to believe the system. It's also easy for, reality and say the stock market, bond market to become very divorced. And then when they snap back, just like we saw with the housing crisis, right? When it snaps back, it's ugly.
Yeah.
So I fear we're moving towards a snapback. I wish I knew when, because I'd get short that in a hurry, but I don't know the when.
Yeah, every time I watch the show, it just makes me want to go out and buy barbed wire and sandbags.
It's valid. I mean, more ammo is always good, right?
I'm at a point here pretty soon where I'm going to have to placard my house. Put a big small arms ammo placards on the side of the house so the fire department shows up.
That would be funny. Yeah. So onto this. I'm interested in your opinion on this and with your experience. U.S. water utilities targeted by foreign hackers, prompting calls for cybersecurity overhaul. The part that really got me on this is this Matthew Motz, chairman of the authority that handles the water and wastewater for this 22,000 person utility, said, if you told me to list the 10 things that could go wrong with our water authority, this would not be on the list. A cyber attack would not be on the list.
Yeah, that's a little spooky.
Yeah.
Makes me ask a lot of questions about Mr. Motz, because we were talking about SCADA vulnerabilities 20 years ago.
Yeah.
There's FBI has a program called InfraGard, and it's a public-private partnership where we would go out and, like, I was the InfraGard chapter liaison in Vermont for a lot of years. I would go out and just talk to different companies and find their cyber security guru, whatever his title happened to be, and say, look, we want to establish a partnership with you where we're trying to push out information that we find on attacks and vulnerabilities, and we want to discuss with you in partnership with others just like you what you're seeing in terms of attacks, because these guys are repelling attacks all the time. There's DDoS attacks. There's all kinds of different things that are going after these guys, and they're fighting it every day.
What kind of attack was that?
Dispersed denial of service attack, the DDoS.
Okay.
Where they're basically just trying to, if your information portal is, let's say it's a window, and information can, like water, can flow through a pipe in that window. What they want to do is, and everybody's got a little, water pick size stream going into this 12-inch round pipe. A denial of service attack is somebody's taking a 15-inch wide fire hose and firing information into that window, which in essence floods your system and blots you out. It shuts you down. You can't you can no longer handle the level of information that's coming at you, and your
Okay.
system can crash. It can shut down. You can put in the equivalent of like a electrical breaker. So
Okay.
that before your system just fries, it shuts off. But then the net effect is it takes you down. So you'll have that happen sometimes. You'll see that, oh, FedEx was hit with a DDoS attack, or they were hit with this attack, or whatever. But these guys are out there fighting those attacks every day.
Okay.
So we wanted to talk to them and say, look, what are you seeing? And if I find out in Seattle that they're seeing this type of attack, well, in Vermont, I could then go out to my InfraGard chapter and say to all these guys locally, hey, this is what's happening in Seattle. Prepare yourselves accordingly. And then they could go back and code up a defense system for it.
Okay.
So InfraGard was a way to have those conversations between the federal government and the local private sector security folks. And one of the big things we all worried about was this growing reliance on SCADA. And somebody in the comments maybe can look up, I've forgotten what SCADA stands for, but it's basically computerized controls of infrastructure, such as water and utilities, like electrical systems. You don't have people saying flip the switch here, flip the switch there. It's all computerized. Well, that's a level of vulnerability, right? Because those computers aren't on internal networks. They're on networks that are accessible via the internet. Now, there's levels of security that you have to get through, but of course, that's what hackers do, right? They hack their way through those levels. So when this guy says, oh, I can't imagine this would have happened, I'm like, buddy, that's exactly what's going to happen in a shooting war. The first thing that's going to happen is they're just going to slam us with cyber attacks, and you're going to see all kinds of stuff like that happen if we don't secure ourselves appropriately. So perhaps Matt should go back to doing something other than being the chairman of the authority that handles water noise, or he should fire his cybersecurity guy, one of the two, maybe both.
Yeah, maybe he's getting some bad info on where the threats are.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder how out of touch some of these authorities are with realities. I mean, we've been talking about in the FBI. You were talking about it 20 years ago. We were talking about 2-3 years ago between Rich and I.
Yeah.
This isn't a secret.
It's
so
not.
For someone in shh.
Yeah. It used to be, if the Chinese wanted to take a dam offline, they had to, parachute in and sneak some guerrillas in there and plant some explosives, or they had to fly somebody over and drop their version of a JDAM on it and blow it up. Now, some 19-year-old kid in a basement in Beijing can flip a few switches and turbines stop spinning, or they start spinning too fast, or sluice gates open, or they close, or the whole system just locks up, and the dam fries itself.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I've been theorizing for some time that cyber attacks we'll know things are getting serious when cyber attacks start happening. Like, successful cyber attacks, not just these attempts. And I personally, maybe I'm biased because I think about it a lot, but I think it'll start with the banking sector, because you shut down the people's ability to, access banking, mainly credit cards. Nobody carries cash anymore. And, you shut that down for a day or two, then it can be like, hey, did you like that? You want to play that game again? Right? You're not going to mess with us when we go over there, right?
Right. Imagine that the war starts and the cyber attack hits, and banks get hit the same time SCADA systems get hit, the same times air traffic controller computer systems get hit. I mean, at any given moment in the daytime in the United States, how many aircraft are flying above the continental United States? Will?
Oh boy, I would guess 4,000 at least.
Okay. Now all of a sudden they all lose communication with ATC. Do you see a problem with that?
There's a couple. There's a couple.
All of a sudden, all the comms go out. All of a sudden, all the transponders on the ground get scrambled. Holy mackerel.
Yeah. Yep.
At the same time that's going on, maybe now we're also the victims of an actual air attack. Bombers and fighters flying in. Can you imagine the jumble that the air defense community would have to deal with?
Oh my gosh. And,
so these SCADA, these cyber attacks are the real deal, and across the board, absolutely. Like you said, my individual banking information, this guy's water authority.
Yeah.
It's all vulnerable.
Well, and that's where, going back to our preparedness theme with all of this, have some cash at home, right, guys? Have some fuel storage. You don't have to go crazy with it like somebody who looks like me. Okay. But have the ability to, make it a week or two at least.
For any kind of emergency. It doesn't have to be
Right.
a deliberate attack. It could be a hurricane. It could be a tornado. Right. It could be whatever.
Yep.
A gasoline truck runs into a transponder. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah. Well, there was just one. It's been a few years back now. I forget where it was. I think it was out east somewhere. A train carrying.
Oh, LPG, liquid petroleum.
No, it was carrying. I think it was chlorine. D-ring.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's one up in Pennsylvania or something like that here a year or two ago, right?
That was the really big one. This one wasn't that big. It's been a number of years back, but they evacuated like a 3 or 4 square mile area, and there was a couple of people unfortunately who passed away because they took too much time to grab their stuff. Yeah. So having that go bag in your house with the information you need, and I try to people like I walk around. Now, I mean, I've got my wallet in my pocket and, car keys in my pocket, and I can leave.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't want to be, okay, it's going to be 30 minutes. Well, that might be 2 minutes too long.
Exactly right. So, and that's one I think about because there's a rail line right over there. I hear the train go by. So it's something that's pops into my head more and more often. So, so in the interest of not going any longer, I just did a headline dump here, guys. So we can see here this is not good stuff. Amazon's cutting hundreds of jobs, including some game streaming thing called Twitch, which I'd never heard of. I don't know, but they're cutting jobs. That's not good. Right. Americans are canceling more of their streaming services. This goes back to, I forget whose comment it was earlier, talking about these other costs we have now that our parents didn't have. Well, people are getting rid of them,
and I know there's on discretionary spending, right?
Right, and they don't do that when things are happy, right? I know there was a lot of uproar about the latest NFL playoff games being on Peacock and subscription-based services, and people had to pay to watch that game. There's been a lot of uproar on social media about that. I would also like to point out the Cowboys lost yesterday to the Packers.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they did.
That's football, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. They use a bat. Renters are being hit harder by inflation than homeowners are, because the landlords are going, hey, housing prices are going up. They're jacking that up, and as you pointed out, you're sitting on a fixed rate mortgage, as am I. Yeah. And so it's not affecting us. Well, it's not always the case. Usually renters are lower on the socioeconomic chain. Yep. So again, those folks are getting hit harder again with that. Same time they're getting squeezed on food and energy as well.
And that rent thing should have been predictable. I mean, 2 years ago, they were saying, okay, we're suspending rent, right?
Yeah.
Because of the COVID thing. Well, if you thought that these landlords were going to eat that and stay viable and not try to recoup that loss, you're just not paying attention.
Yep. I think we're going to see that swing the other way, because during COVID, and when I say during COVID, it started during the lockdowns, there was a lot of multifamily housing built. As those come online now, I think we're going to see rents plummet, and that's going to affect the housing market because people will be like, why would I buy? I can rent for less. Yeah. So we'll see how that plays out. see if I get that one right. We'll find out. Samsung flags worse than expected drop in quarterly profit on weak demand. So that would be consumers not spending. Yeah. And if we look at it, I can't think of anything Samsung makes that I would call needed. You're talking about TVs, and I don't even know what all they make. Phones,
My washer and dryer are Samsung.
Are they? Okay. But these are things that, things that aren't daily, monthly purchases, right?
You don't buy a dishwasher every week.
Exactly. So, so that's, we're looking at those things. Going bigger picture here. Germany's having a lot of problems right now. They've got rail strikes and farmer protests. I believe, is a diesel tax they're putting in that is just exorbitant, and the farmers are going 9. So they've got tractors all over the place in the city centers in Germany right now, shutting everything down.
Yeah, you gotta love it when the Germans and the French protest. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. And as a general rule, don't piss off the people that feed you.
Yeah, that's usually good advice.
Yep. And then going back to your comment earlier about Maersk suspending shipping through the Red Sea until further notice.
Mm.
So this is going to drive up the time it takes to get these goods to market, and also therefore the cost. I believe it adds 2 weeks to the transit doing that. Somebody's going to pay for that, and it's going to be people that look like us.
Yeah. And it's going to encourage terrorists, right?
Right. They're getting what they want.
Other people are going to look at that and go, "Oh, the Houthis got it to work."
Yeah.
And it's having an impact around the world.
Right. And how do we as a country combat that inflation? Raising interest rates isn't going to make that go away.
Yep.
Right. So I think there's some of it that we have to admit that is just out of our control, but the government doesn't like to do that because then they're admitting they can't control everything. Right. So
yeah, the last thing governments like to do is admit weakness.
Exactly. Well, and there are a lot of people who have confidence in the government think that they can fix everything.
Yeah.
Right. So they don't want to shake that confidence.
Right.
Because in the end, it's all a confidence game. Right.
Yes, it is.
So,
at the end of the day, that's what it all depends on. Faith. It's all faith based.
Right. Exactly. So, and this one, Don put this up on Facebook, and I came across. Are you familiar with 15-minute cities?
I'm not. I was kind of curious about this picture.
Okay, so where is it? Somewhere in England.
The Chinese are throwing up real fast?
No, although not a bad guess. Maybe Craig can help me out. Somewhere in the UK, it escapes me at the moment. They sectioned off a city, and what they're going for is these 15-minute cities where there's say a grid or a square where you live, and they say inside this square or grid is everything you could possibly need. There's a pharmacy, there's a grocery store, there's doctors.
A 15-minute walk or a 15-minute radius?
15-minute drive, I think. And if you go outside of that, you'll be taxed. Seriously, this is for real. Oxford, yep. Thank you, Mark. Oxford, 15-minute city. And they've got the license plate readers out there. And if you cross the line, here's your bill. And it's because of climate change.
Oh, for the love of Pete.
And New York City is putting this in, or trying to put this in, I should say, for getting into Manhattan. And it's going to be, I think for semis, it was
just one more reason for me not to go to Manhattan.
No doubt, right?
Wow.
I think to get a semi into Manhattan, it was like $45 or $50 per trip in.
Yeah, well,
and for cars, it was like $15.
Yeah, well, the truckers aren't going to eat that. They're going to pass that right along to the consumer.
Yep.
And a processing fee besides.
Yeah. So, So the analogy here, of course, is the bird cage.
Yeah.
And the whole, that bird inside that cage is safe, but it's not free.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So
taxed to move around.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Huh? The more free Russia becomes, the more communist we become.
Yeah. It's almost like, what was that? Yuri, who was that interview back in the day? Oh gosh. Started with a B. His last name started with a B. I'll see if I can find it and put it up there. But he laid out exactly how this was in the 80s, man, the suits and the big glasses. It was the whole shebang. But he was a defector from Soviet Union. And he laid out exactly what they were doing, and he's been spot on.
Yeah.
So,
great.
Yeah. So
like I always say, South Carolina, it's like living in America,
Yeah. Yep.
Just hope it doesn't fall until after I die.
And Mark here says Brisbane and Melbourne, Australia, have signed up for the 15-minute city as well.
Wow.
Yeah. So. Yep. So crazy stuff. And the dog is going nuts about something.
We have an intelligent response to that. That's offensive on so many different levels.
Yep. So, All right, I guess that's all we got today. You want to take us out?
I guess I'll go start drinking early after all of that.
Hey, you can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning.
Fair point. Fair point.
You wanna
Really
take us
good
out?
bang up job here, sir. I really, I got to say, I'm impressed, and I'm walking away a little bit smarter than I showed up this morning.
Well,
So
I appreciate that. And I appreciate your time joining me with it, Dr. Fuller. It's always more fun to have a little back and forth conversation.
Always a pleasure, sir. You be
All
safe out there, because as we all know, that fight is coming. Be ready.